in the middle of the Hanukkah holidays to discuss political issues. It's not easy to discuss domestic politics at the time where Israel at the moment with so much loss and damage and suffering around us and uncertainty. But things are moving in Israeli politics, and we want to get a heads up on what is already being carried out and what can we expect in the months to come. We already have an emergency cabinet in Israel that was formed after the war began, with a centrist opposition party joining the government. We have major changes in Israeli public opinion. We have some processes towards new leadership among the Israeli left. We have new players who are aspiring to enter in politics, some of which have been active during the last year in the pro-democracy movement. And we have municipal elections coming up, maybe even soon. So it's quite easy to assume that 2024 will be a year in which politics will play a major role in trying to understand and shape what's happening in Israel. And there are already some indication as to what we can expect. With a caveat, of course, because Israeli politics is very difficult thing to predict, even at normal days, and at times of such uncertainty and security issues, it's even more difficult to do so. But we have three excellent speakers, all of them with a significant background in politics from years, from different perspectives, from activism, political work, journalism, campaign management. So again, I thank you all for being with us. We'll do conversation with each of the speakers for about 15 minutes each, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. I will shortly and briefly introduce the three speakers. You can find a full bio in the invitation. First is Tal Shalev, Shalom Tal, Chief Political Correspondent for Walla News, which is the Israeli largest website providing independent breaking news and analysis 24 hours a day, with lots of experience in Israeli politics. Second, we have Nili Reichman, CEO and founder of Humanizing Public Identity Branding, a boutique agency for strategic consulting, crisis management, public branding, and identity architecture design, with experience in campaigns of Herzog for the presidency and Yair Lapid in the general elections. And Rami Hod, hi Rami, the executive director of the Berl Katznelson Center, a progressive Zionist ideas center that promotes policy solutions to Israel's core challenges and educate and trains the next generation of progressive Zionist leaders, thinkers, and civil servants. So thank you all for joining us. And Tala, will begin with you. You've been observing Israeli politics for a long while, based on your media work. What impact do you see that the war in Gaza already is having on Israeli politics, in terms of attitudes towards Netanyahu as prime minister, in terms of the government composition, where it may lead to, and the popularity of various parties as of now? Tal, you're on mute.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. First of all, I just want to say, give a full disclosure to your question, because I feel and I think in many ways that the 7th of October was such an unprecedented national event, that its impact on Israeli politics is still, its full impact on Israeli politics is still unclear. And in many ways, I feel daily, on a daily basis, that I'm analyzing politics in an old, like in languages from the old world, and that things will be different after the war. And then on other days, I wake up and I think, well, everything's going to be exactly the same. So I just want to admit that as long as we're under the fog of war and wars going on, it's very difficult to clearly analyze and see what is happening, because there are a lot of things happening under this fog of war. The first and most important impact, in my opinion, is actually a positive impact. And that is that after almost 10 months that Israel was polarized and divided by, one of the worst internal crises it ever had, on the 7th of October, at least amongst the people, I think that there was a moment of unity. The Israelis united in grief. They united in their will to protect and their will to fight back. They are mostly united in their grief and their sorrow and in the need for revenge in many ways. And they're also united, mostly united, behind the hostages' families and behind that horrible, crisis. And this, of course, led to an unprecedented scenario. Gantz, as you mentioned, Nimrod, Gantz joining Netanyahu. It's not unprecedented. It was just unthinkable up until the 7th of October. Gantz already sat in a government with Netanyahu in 2020. He cheated him. He broke their agreement. And Gantz vowed to everyone who wanted to listen that he would never sit with Netanyahu again unless there's a huge catastrophe, which unfortunately happened. And he joined the government, which gave Netanyahu, for the past 2 months, this kind of veil of legitimacy, which has been very important for him in order to, lead the war and lead the country during the war, and his legitimacy to go through difficult decisions like the hostages release. And at the moment, and as long as Gantz is surrounding Netanyahu, he kind of gives him this kind of shield of chasinut, of
immunity.
Of immunity. At the same time, if you look at the numbers, Netanyahu is at an all-time low. There's only about 20% of Israelis want him to stay after the war, or even now. 80% of Israelis want him to resign either now, during the war, or after the war. His coalition has lost a third of its power since the election. 10 of those they already lost during the judicial overhaul crisis, and the other 10 they lost since the crisis. And on the other hand, you see Gantz basically spiking in the polls. Gantz has been his line of being very unified and being very patriotic has basically that's where the center, right, left, everyone is, and he's kind of spiked to 36 to 40 seats in the polls. All his current situation in the polls, though, should be taken with a grain of salt, because many of the seats that Gantz currently has are disappointed right-wing voters, disappointed Likud voters who don't have anywhere else to sit. But if there were to be elections, or if there will be elections in the upcoming months, then there is definitely going to be a new right-wing party, which will be led by either Naftali Bennett or Yossi Cohen, the former Mossad chief, and that will immediately take Gantz, I think, between 10 to 12 seats, if not even more. And an important thing to note is that there's this huge dissonance between how unpopular Netanyahu and his coalition is and how stable his coalition is, which will, I think the next question is about that, but also that I think that in overall opinion, there has also been a moving, everyone has moved a bit to the right. So everyone who was in the center is a bit more right-wing. I'm talking about the traditional scale of left and right, which talks about basically trust in the Palestinians and trust in the two-state solution. The 7th of October succeeded to shatter, and of course it hurt, the peace camp in Israel. The Gaza border communities, which were horrified on the 7th of October, were mostly peace from the peace camp. So I think, and that will also have an impact on the next elections and where people are going to be. So that's.
Thank you. And Tal, you really mapped what's been happening in Israeli politics with a bit of trajectories towards the future. You know, the common question that we all get in interviews is, will Netanyahu stay? What will happen? Which scenario will materialize? So if you look at the scenarios for the future, given the caveat that you mentioned about it difficult to predict, what are the major political scenarios that you can identify, and which are the most likely ones? Also in terms of process, you know, how long will it take? How will the change happen? What should we anticipate or be on the lookout to when we watch Israeli politics in the months to come?
So first of all, that very much depends. The question, all of the scenarios and how Netanyahu will stand or will be standing very much depends on how the war ends, or what will be, if there will be some kind of victory that Netanyahu can present to his right-wing electorate. In my personal opinion, there is no other victory than bringing back the hostages. But Netanyahu's electorate wants to see a significant achievement, no less than an assassination of Yahya Sinwar, in my opinion, will satisfy his camp. And that will determine how shaky Netanyahu is from inside his coalition, because to be honest, the most effective way for Netanyahu to fall or not to fall is from inside his coalition. Now, if Netanyahu ends this war with a strong, image of victory, then maybe his coalition will stand behind him. But if he finishes the way he traditionally finishes conflicts in Gaza, with an American dictation about the timeline, and it'll be unclear if Israel has actually defeated Hamas or not, then that can shake Netanyahu's own coalition. Then elements inside Netanyahu's coalition, especially Itamar Ben-Gvir, but also inside Netanyahu's party, will feel much more secure to initiate moves against Netanyahu, and perhaps even will find it in their own political interest to act against him. But before we even get there, Netanyahu's most dangerous day, the D-Day, basically, is when Gantz leaves the government. As long as Gantz is in the government, nothing's going to happen to Netanyahu. And the exit point of Gantz is also unclear. What will be Gantz's exit point? How close is it? How close can it be? One thing I can say, that as long as that there are so many hostages in Gaza and so many soldiers in Gaza, I do not see Gantz leaving the government or shattering Netanyahu's stability. If one of the two other things happens, all of the hostages or most of the hostages are returned, or there is a significant achievement in Gaza, which afterwards many of the soldiers will be able to be, especially the reservist soldiers, will be able to be released from their serve, then Gantz might start about thinking the government. And that's when all of the scenarios begin. And basically there are three scenarios. One is that there's a constructive vote of no confidence, meaning that a group from the coalition, you would have to have between 10 to 15 members of Knesset for that, either from the Likud or a significant party from the coalition, will vote for an alternative government inside the Knesset. They have to have a majority of 61. The current opposition has 56 seats, but you have to take 6 of those seats off because 6 of them belong to non-Zionist parties, Hadash and Ta'al, which will not support any alternative government. So if you do the math, you need between 10 to 15 Likud members or a big party to vote for an alternative government. The more likely scenario and more easy scenario politically would be to impose or call for early elections, which means that you need to dissolve the Knesset. For that, for instance, you will have no problem to have the 6 votes of the Arab parties, so it's easier. You just need less members of the coalition to betray Netanyahu. And there's also the scenario that Netanyahu himself will vie or push for early elections. One of the things that Netanyahu is considering now is to have, at some point, call for a quick primary election inside the Likud to first consolidate his reign inside the Likud, and then lead the country to a quick elections. These are the main 3 scenarios. And there's also a scenario in which Netanyahu tries to cling in power and continue with his current coalition. And here's the factor which Netanyahu is not taking into account, and is very important. It's outside of the political system. It's the protests. The minute Gantz leaves the government, that will also be kind of the D-Day for the protests to go back to the streets. And these are going to be stronger protests than we've seen in the past year, more difficult protests and more painful protests because they are likely to be, fueled with the liberal forces are likely to be fueled with perhaps members of bereaved families from the massacre of 7th of October who will demand Netanyahu take responsibility, or members of the hostages' families, and most importantly, reservist soldiers when they finish their serve in Gaza, if and when they are released from their serve. Over history, reservist protests in Israel have been the most successful ones. When you look back, you see these are the ones that brought political change. This was true in 73. After the Yom Kippur War, this was true after the Second Lebanon War, and this was also true in the late 80s when there was a huge wave of protests against corruption, which also led to the falling of a government. So that is actually Netanyahu's biggest threat, and he actually knows that probably because he himself was involved in the campaign that brought Olmert down after the Second Lebanon War.
Yeah, and one scenario that you didn't mention, and perhaps not by chance, is of Netanyahu declaring that he failed and resigning from office.
I just don't see that. I just don't think that's in the cards.
You mentioned the American dictation issue that may come into play later on. And we already see some analysts speculating that Netanyahu may go for like a public crisis with Biden, kind of accusing the US for stopping him from achieving the war objectives. We can zoom out on that and say we are going to an election year in the US. So we are talking also to an American audience here. How does the US component enter into the Israeli domestic political debate, if at all?
So Netanyahu is actually already subtly building a campaign which will lead to a division with the administration, with the Biden administration, regarding the Palestinian Authority. Netanyahu is trying to build his own political campaign domestically around the question of who will control the Gaza the day after. Will it be the Palestinian Authority or not? Netanyahu does not have an answer what will be in Gaza the day after, but he definitely is campaigning that he will not allow the Palestinian Authority to go back to Gaza, and that will probably be the bedrock of any future dispute with the Biden administration. That being said, as long as the fighting is going on both in the south and in the north, and Israel still needs the American assistance, especially in ammunition and its military assistance, Netanyahu will have to try and keep any confrontation with the administration low scale, because he will have to be very careful that it does not hurt. That being said, we might see instances in which we get messages from Washington telling Netanyahu to slow down, and seeing that he does not slow down. I think that serves on both Netanyahu and the Biden administration, by the way. I think that the Biden administration needs to distance himself from Netanyahu, and if there's a dispute, as long as it isn't very deep, it could serve both sides politically. And to the larger picture, the closer we get to the elections, it'll be more dangerous and delicate dance for Netanyahu to play, because the minute the campaign heats up, and if Donald Trump does win the Republican primary and becomes the Republican candidate, and if Netanyahu continues to see that he's favoriting Biden in some of the swing states, then I don't think there's any reason to predict that something will be different than in the past. Netanyahu will probably play internal politics with the Biden administration, just like he has in any election campaign that we've seen during his tenure.
Thank you, Tal. Very much appreciated. As we speak, those of you in the audience who have some questions could write them down in the Q&A, and we'll take them later on in the time that will remain. Nearly, I'm moving over to you now. And you have so much experience in campaigning in Israel and in winning campaigns. So generally speaking, what makes a successful campaign in Israeli politics? And if you look towards the next elections in Israel, will something dramatically change in political preferences or behavior of Israelis that will impact how leaders and politicians will try to present themselves and position themselves?
Well, I think that political campaign or public one in every democratic election is determined mainly by the public's ability to choose hope over to believe in fear. People in Israel are much easier in believing in fear because of security issues that we have them as main issues in most of elections in Israel. A few are different. 2013, 10 years ago, that was mainly on social and economical issues, but we have security issues leading the agenda in the political campaigns almost in every campaign that we have. And of course now that will be the main issue because we're going to have several years that of not a clear future in our borders in Gaza and also in the north with Hezbollah. And we have the Houthim now from Yemen. So it's going to be interesting here. And we didn't even say Iran yet. Netanyahu is the one that chooses fear every time. He made that choice a very long time ago when he started his political career. With choosing this strategy, he always needs an enemy to defeat. So what we are seeing now is basically a copy of his 96 campaign saying that Shimon Peres will divide Jerusalem, and now he's saying, I'm the only one that can prevent the Palestinian Authority in Gaza. So basically Netanyahu is redoing this campaign as he already did in former elections, and he will have a big issue this time because he always talking about his willingness to be remembered as the protector of Israel. He wanted to leave this legacy when he steps down. And I think his legacy now is October 7th, as we are sorry to say, but this is the one now. Just imagine that Netanyahu would announce that he is resigning at the end of the first phase of the war, and it will free him to win the war and to bring achievement to the Israeli people. Then freed from every political interest on the table and every self-interest that might be judged as the one that takes consideration over the public interest, he would move that off the table, and he would maybe have a chance to save his legacy. But he chose not to do that. We see that President Rivlin used to say that that there used to be right and left, but now there is only right and wrong here in Israel. So as Tal said, the whole political system moved to the right. The whole public in Israel moved to the right after the October 7th. And I think that even so, because the events were so biblical that we can't even measure it yet. We don't know to measure ourselves yet in this new reality post October 7th. I think the issue, along with security, will be the belief, the public belief in the potential leaders to rebuild Israel society trust in leaders, to rebuild Israel society trust in the institutions, the democratic institutions, after several years of attacking the police and the judicial reform as a whole, as it climbed up, the ability to rebuild Israel's trust through all the mechanism of elections and people that, as it seems now, are only worried in putting their friends in high positions, and you find in a case of disaster, you find only shells of government offices and not anything functioning, because it's years of destructions and neglections that brought us to this sad result. So I think that Israeli would want someone that will have the ability to restitch the delicate tissue that is the Israeli society, combined together from all kinds of people, from all kinds of backgrounds. And we need to have more than a destiny ally that ties us together. We need to have calling ally that also calls us to do something, to be a greater society, to deliver the promise of the Jewish state. And I don't think that Netanyahu, in these parameters, is the right person to do that. But I'm not saying goodbye to Netanyahu yet, because Netanyahu can still survive, of course, as we saw in the last 5 elections that we had. Of course, in research, we can see that 3/4 of Israel society wants him to step down after the main part of the elections. They expect him to do it on his own, but they are willing to go out and fight for it. We saw I think 500,000 people going out Saturday after Saturday, if you count the whole country, of course, from a raining evening in January until just about the Jewish holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, etc. And I think that they will go out and they will have the reservists also coming back from the battlefield, fighting with them. We're going to see the families who lost the loved ones also going out. Everybody's now sitting at home and waiting. They're waiting for the gong. And the one that will hit the gong is Gantz, as Tal said. But I'm also leaving an option for a player from the right wing, maybe Smotrich, maybe Ben-Gvir, that is, of course, seeing the research, and they want to defer themselves from Netanyahu. They want to be the right of the right of the right, and to present an option for the right-wing voters, to extreme right-wing voters, to have another party to vote to. So they would go out of the government, saying Netanyahu is not willing to do what's necessary to in order to eliminate Hamas. They would demand much more acoustic actions. And once Netanyahu won't be able to do that because he has Biden and American restriction on his head, they're going to resign, and this is going to be their campaign. Maybe he's the one that can prevent PO in Gaza, but we are the one that can prevent Gaza. We are the one that can bring you back to Gush Katif and rebuild it, etc. So Netanyahu have trouble from all around the place. And of course, he's not trusting Gantz to not drop the floor below him just at the bad moment. So he's trying to, as Hamas do, he's chofer mechilot. He's digging the ground also, trying to break the Amachaneh Mamlechti, the Gantz party, into 2 parts. He's trying to bring Gideon Sa'ar to stay in the government, even if Gantz leaves. So it won't look like everything falls apart, only one part is falling out. And to have a really right-wing government still profounding the war. Other than that, I think, well, a lot of people in Israel nowadays say that Netanyahu he does not fit. He's not capable for job. I think he shows us that he is. He is doing a very, very good job cementing his coalition, paying off money of a budget that needed to go to the war needs, paying off his political partners, and buying some quiet time. And if it sounds familiar, this behavior to pay money in order to buy quiet, that's on your responsibility only.
Yeah, it's interesting to see both in your words, Nili, and yours, Tal, how political tactics remain the same, even though we are experiencing a groundbreaking change, whether it's cementing the coalitions, attempts to divide the opponents, issues of politics of fear. It's all very much still present in the Israeli society. Although what happened in the last year in this pro-democracy movement that was very inspiring led to an aspiration for a different type or different language of politics, of political gaming. So briefly, Nida, do you see a change in the political language? So do these old tactics of politics of fear and division will still hold once Israelis came together to fight for democracy and now coming together in face of an horrible war?
I think unity is the one thing that scares Netanyahu more than all. And every time someone speaks about unity, every time, even in the first days after the October 7th, people were trying to come, ministers in the government tried to come to the hospital and visit the wounded ones, and they were scared away and shouting, "Go out, you are the one that enabling us from being united together." Those voices are absent now from the Israeli political and public sphere. Those voices are not here. And I think we will hear them. I think we will hear them in the demonstrations after the first phase of the war will end. But now everything is so quiet. You can only hear, the sounds in the minds of Israel. You can also see, other than those who protested against the judicial overhaul, that already earned almost 10 mandates that Tal talked about before, that Netanyahu lost them from his base. You can add to that a different number of 10 mandates that he lost now. So it brings two new languages to the court. It brings a language of blocking any initiative that will hurt Israel democracy, and rebuilding a new state with a new social agreement, with a new Brit, with a new ally between every Israeli, no matter if he's Jewish or Arabic or gay or LGBT, whatever, religious or secular, and to have the understanding that in Israel, especially nowadays, everybody needs to serve. Everybody needs to serve and to be a part of the security effort, and everybody needs to serve and be a part of the economical effort, because this war is going to put on us a lot of public expense, and the way the government acts now shows that they don't even care about this. So even now, having so many dead people, so many wounded people, so many soldiers fighting for the state of Israel, coming back from after IDF trips, abroad, cutting off their own time of fun and come here. They wear the uniform of Tzal and they go out and fight. And as we know, a lot of them are wounded or in the bad part of the cases, losing their own lives.
And a final word, perhaps, nearly on the centrist politics in Israel, because it was mentioned how Benny Gantz is currently, like, say, the big winner of changes in public attitudes and becoming the most popular in terms of party preferences and the most seemingly fit to office, while the public actually moves to the right. What should he do to maintain this momentum and utilize it? And on the other hand, we didn't mention, I think, much Yair Lapid at the moment, and Yair Lapid was dominating the political center over the last year. He even became a prime minister through that, and now he's kind of losing ground within this centrist politics. So how do you see this dynamics between Gantz and Lapid and the political center in Israel in general?
Well, supporting Gantz did increase significantly, but the supporting Gantz is very fragile, and we have to remember that. Only 50% of the people who are saying they're going to vote for him in the next elections, only half of them are certain and sure in this choice. Well, Gantz is basically the most right in the left wing. So he's the first stop that you arrive when you cross from the right wing to the left one, if we speak in the old language of the Israeli politics. So he's the first stop you hit. And then you wait there. So as the name of his party, Blue and White, this is like the biggest parking lot in the Israeli politics. And once the gong will be hit by Gantz himself, and so we're going to see Yossi Cohen maybe jumping in the political water. We're going to see Naftali Bennett, former prime minister, also that is has already started his campaign. He's running around and well, he's doing good. He's also fighting and also bringing solutions to those who had to move from their own houses. I think the protesters will also join and will eat some parts of Gantz. And I also think that we're going to see a big wave of the youngsters. I mean, not that youngsters, but 35 to 45 people that try to avoid from politics and from public life. And they will understand, or they have already understood, that they have no choice, because at the end of the point, it's either them choosing and deciding on their own and their children's future, or it's David Amsalem or Galit Distel Atbaryan or someone else. So I hear a lot of people saying, that's it. I can't take the privilege anymore to not be a part of the game. Some of us need to fight in the battlefield, and some of us need to fight in the public field.
Thank you. And we already see it happening in...
Just one sentence, please. I'm sorry. You asked about Lapid. I think we... Elijah Netanyahu so many times before, and every time we see him rising back up, it's even too soon to say our goodbyes from Netanyahu. We won't even start to write our goodbyes from Lapid.
Thank you. And I think what you mentioned before about people coming into politics, we see this playing out in the municipal election campaigns in different cities across Israel. The elections were postponed because of the war, but we see a wave of new people, especially young people, entering politics, wanting to make an impact. And I agree with you that we may see this happening in the general elections as well. Over to you, Rami. We heard a lot over the last minutes about Israelis moving to the right. Okay, and you're working with progressive Zionists and are playing a major role in renewal and reshaping of this field. Going on the ideological level, how does the Israeli left or progressive Zionist left is relating to what's happening in the war in Gaza? What are the positions? What are the possible pathways towards Israeli-Palestinian peace? It is becoming something that many Israelis are skeptical of. And where does it put the Israeli Zionist left in terms of its international partnership? Is our beliefs in line with what international colleagues and sister parties abroad thinking, or is there a gap emerging?
Yeah. Thank you, Nimrod. First, I think that it's important to emphasize that in our eyes of the, I would say, liberal, progressive Zionist, or what we call the left or the center left in Israel, Israel is fighting a just war. I know it's not popular to say it in some progressive circles in the state or in other places, but according to our eyes, according to my eyes, it is a just war. And Israel has every right and should continue to eliminate the military capabilities of Hamas. In case we don't reach it, we're accepting an impossible situation with no Israelis back to the Gaza border. And I want to remind everyone that the idea that Israel needs safe borders is actually a Zionist left idea. The idea that says that the borders of Israel should include settlements within populated Palestinian areas, but should include legitimate needed towns and kibbutzim within Israel, recognized and international borders in Gaza, is actually a liberal progressive Zionist ideas. So I know that some people in the international community and in the international left don't understand our position, but this is actually a very deep, a very fundamental issue of Israel has the right to exist within the international and the legitimate borders of the state of Israel. And part of this is, yes, fighting terror very aggressively when we don't have any other option to, Nonetheless, we do believe that the military solution, as justified as it may be, and it is justified in Israel to act now as it's acting, can never be the goal. It should only be seen as the means to an end. It should be as a means to an end. And the goal, according to our eyes, and I know that now in Israel, in some circles, it can sound weird to talk about a two-state solution, but yes, we do believe that under the umbrella of the Biden administration, of the international community, of moderate Arab countries, to establish the rule of the Palestinian Authority in both Gaza and the West Bank, like the Biden administration says, is the least worst option on the table. The least worst option on the table. It's not a good option. We live in a tough neighborhood, but it's the least worst option on the table. And we think that with this foundation, it's possible to re-engage in a dialogue with the Palestinian Authority. I deeply, deeply believe as a committed Zionist and as a progressive, I believe that the only way for Israel to be a Jewish, democratic, and just state is to make difficult and brave decisions. I know that people say now that Israelis are moving to the right, but I just want to remind all of us that after the Yom Kippur War, Israel made peace with Egypt, that after the first Intifada, Yitzhak Rabin, which is an extremely military, which was very, very militant in terms of, in years of fighting terror, he understood that there is no military solution to the Palestinian issue, and that after the second Intifada, Ariel Sharon understood that, again, he needed to re-engage in peace with the Palestinian Authority. And he needs to move things on the diplomatic level and not only on the military level. And I deeply, deeply believe that Israel is strong and creative and capable in making tough decisions that are strategic for its existence, even and perhaps especially after these dark times, and we do live in a dark times. And the atmosphere is very pessimistic, and there is this tendency to say that Israelis are moving to the right, but we have a legacy, the Zionist, the Israeli, the Jewish legacy of making tough decisions in dark times is here. And I think that I really think that we can make it. And I think that there is another reason why we on the center left believe that the upcoming years are the right time to make this decision, which is the collapse of the worldview, the agenda, the misconception of Netanyahu and the Israeli right, the collapse of the security and political worldview that was dominant in Israel since Netanyahu came back to power in 2009. This worldview has completely collapsed on October 7. We still don't know, as Tal and Nili mentioned, we still don't know what will be the alternative agenda that will dominate Israel, but we do know that that the idea that Israel needs to manage the conflict with the Palestinians instead of resolving it was proven to be wrong. We do know that the idea that we can strengthen Hamas while weakening the Palestinian Authority was proven to be disastrous for the security of Israelis, and we do know that the misconceptions of Israel doesn't need the US, doesn't need the West, is not true. So we know that these three misconceptions that are in the heart of the political and security agenda of the right have led us to a catastrophe. And now the big struggle is over the narrative, what will be the alternative agenda that will presented to the Israeli public. Is it only the agenda of having an Israeli politics that is composed of, let's say, 50 shades of right? We have no choice. We have no future. Nothing is possible, right? Or there will be some kind of a hope, like Nili mentioned, that yet coming from this difficult and dark times, Israel can make a change and make strategic decisions that are crucial to its existence. First and foremost, having borders. Israel is a country without borders. From a clearly Zionist security perspective, Israel needs borders.
Ami, thank you. Even before the war, what we saw in the Israeli politics after the last elections was the center left having its lowest ever representation in the Knesset, with Meretz not passing the threshold and Labour with 4 seats. How do you think these two parties who used to form coalitions together reached a situation of such a weak performance in the elections? And what has been done since the elections in order to make sure that next time around things will be different?
Yeah. So I want to say I don't think that the parties themselves are the issue, but is the worldview that has some kind of a political representation that is talking basically about fair economy and about two-state solution and about equality within the borders of a Jewish democratic state. And I think that what has happened to what was in the past labor Zionism, left Zionism in Israel, is actually the issue of Netanyahu becoming the top voting priority in Israel. When the question is if you are pro-Bibi, anti-Bibi, for corruption, anti-corruption, when the political battle is not about issues, it's not about policies, it's not about the economy, it's not about security, it's not about peace, it's not about the future of the Palestinians, but it's about personality and it's about corruption. Ideological parties are in a difficult situation. I'm not saying that the leadership of the Zionist left didn't make lots of bad decisions. They did make lots of bad decisions. But I think that the positive thing that is happening now, I hope that the day after Netanyahu will be a day when Israel starts to ask the day that Israelis will again ask themselves the fundamental questions that Israel as a country faces. Not a politics that is 100% focused on personality. If you like this person or you hate it, you think he's good for Israel or bad for Israel, but a politics that is more centrist on issues, not entire on issues, as I know that modern politics are not about issues mostly. But I think that in a political climate, when there are fundamental questions that are re-asked in the Israel political climate about the economy, about the public sector in Israel, about the social services in Israel that was collapsed under 25 years of extreme right-wing politics, extreme right-wing economy, about the future of Israel as a liberal state, like happened in the last year of demonstration. I think that there is a hope that some kind of Zionist left Zionist center will be back to play some kind of role in Israeli politics. And I want to say another thing. Look at Smotrich now, or look at the role that the settler right is playing in Israeli politics throughout the last 20 years. The most important question is not only who will form the government, who will be the bigger player in terms of the mandate. The question is if, and I think that the missing link in Israeli politics is having a progressive Zionist left parties that will lead a clear ideological way and will make the center, which of course will be the bigger part of the center left bloc, to move to more accurate and more brave stances. Smotrich makes 10 times more influence than his real side. The settler movement in politics are more important than Likud in terms of the policies and the ideas and the ideology. So I think the issue is not only if Israel will have a Zionist left that has 4 mandates, 6 mandates, but 10 mandates, but whether we can make the Palestinian-Israeli issues or other issues like the economy and issues that plays part in the Israeli politics. And in that issue, I think that the Zionist left could have a role in reshaping the system.
Yeah, and I will follow up on that, Rabbi. We're not going into individual issues of leaders of parties, but we did see Merav Michaeli, the leader of Labor, announcing that she will resign from the party leadership, and that kind of sparks a discourse within the left about its role in the future of Israeli politics. So when the left begins to renew itself, what it can aspire for in terms of that impact that you mentioned. And for example, 2 specific issues. One is looking back at the Bennett-Lapid government, for example, that lasted for a year but had ministers coming from both Labor and Meretz advancing the same ideology that you mentioned. Was that a good example of impact of center-left parties within a broader coalition? And second, perhaps, and Tal mentioned the Arab parties or the non-Zionist parties about this notion of partnerships within the Israeli politics between left, center, and other parties. How do you see the role of the center left in shaping those issues moving forward?
I think that the future of the Israeli Zionist left lies in its ability to understand that the center is here to stay. And the center and the left is not going to replace the center. The center has a role, the Zionist left has a role. Like the right-wing bloc sees himself as a bloc, you have the moderate right, you have the settler right, you have the orthodox right. They are fighting with each other, yeah, but they have the same goal. They are inside a future coalition together. I think that the failure of the left to understand that the center, it doesn't matter if it's Gantz or Lapid. I think there is a difference between Gantz and Lapid. I think that Lapid is in terms of the Israel-Palestinian issue currently is speaking more brightly about the day after, something that Gantz is avoiding now. But I think that the ability understand of the left not to imagine himself going back to the Rabin times when the left ruled Israel, but understanding himself as a parallel that has a similar position in the center-left bloc, like the settler has, like the settler movement has in the right, which means not being the dominant power, not being stronger than the center in terms of the seats in the Knesset, understanding, but with not such a big power, you can make a difference if you choose two issues that are important to you. And you're campaigning about it, and you're pushing about each issue, like the settlements, like the welfare state, like the economy, like wages, like real issues, like the social services, and you're pushing forward this agenda within future coalition, and you don't try to replace the center, or you don't try to, and you don't have, again, this imagination that will come back to the big days of the Israeli left. I think that it's possible. I think that it's possible. So it's not issue of the personality, it's issues of what is the goal of the Zionist left. And when the Zionist left, as I think, will understand that it serves the same role that the settler movement is serving at the right, which is being the most organized, ideological, capable in terms of the politics, and not necessarily being the strongest or the bigger. I think that's the way we can rebuild the Israeli center left.
Thank you so much. I think we covered almost all of the political spectrum in Israel in the last 60 minutes. We do have a few questions coming from the audience, which we will share with you all together, and you can each take a couple of minutes, but please not longer than that, to pick and choose whichever you want to address. Some of the questions are a bit more general, so I will put them under the political lens of our discussions. The first one is whether you see a chance for Yair Lapid joining the current coalition, a bit like what Benny Gantz did. I already see your initial reaction, but someone will put it into words after I complete listing the questions. So that's the first one. The second one is more relating to the budget vote. And, Israeli coalitions can often collapse around disagreements about the budget. So is a budget vote next year could be a stumbling block for the future of the coalition, leading to its dissolution. The third one relates to whether there was prior knowledge of what will happen on October 7th. And from a political lens, the question is whether that will be an issue of debate, of whether Netanyahu knew or should have known of what is going to happen, and how will this impact voting behavior. The fourth one is about right-wing messaging and the extreme language coming out of right-wing ministers, far right-wing ministers, some of them in quite esoteric positions, but making a big impact on how Israeli positions are seen abroad. Will that impact maybe people who voted for the far right before, but seeing this conduct will question whether that's the responsible thing to do again? And the final question, which relates to the future of Hamas as an idea or in a social movement rather than a military, terror, or political movement, is the understanding that is evolving in circles in Israel that you cannot eliminate Hamas, as an idea. Will that be entering the political debate? So will that be used against one politician or another as a sign of their failure or success in the war, if that's clear? So those are the questions you have. We'll go perhaps reverse order. So we'll begin with Rami, go to Nili, and end with Tal. Again, you don't need to answer all. Take 2-3 minutes tops, and the floor is yours. Rami, please.
I think that what we're seeing now with the budget is unprecedented. It's really unprecedented. I don't think that it will lead to the collapse of the government, but it definitely leads to a growing understanding, even in the Israeli soft right or moderate right, that this government, maybe they are right wing on security, whatever that means after October 7, but they don't want this government. I think that this part of the Israeli electorate of moderate right wing voters who don't believe in the Palestinians but don't want Ben Gvir and don't want Smotrich are extremely important. These are the people who are now voting for Gantz. And I think that the dispute about the budget and the understanding that even in these darkest times, this government, which is my eyes is a horrible government, doesn't see gives money to projects and to issues that are unnecessary in order to Israel to win the war and to invest in social services that Israel needs. I think that it's making the gap between the moderate right and this government bigger, which of course I think it's important, but it will not lead to the collapse of the government. I think that it is likely that Hamas will be defeated in the military. Israel has made the second Intifada was something that Israel using military force and afterwards using diplomatic means. Israel defeated the second Intifada. The level of terror in the West Bank has decreased really, has dramatically decreased since the second Intifada. So I think it's possible. Again, I know that in some liberal progressive circles, it's not popular to say, but yes, Israel has military capabilities to make the threat from Gaza almost inexistent. And in the same time, it should also go to diplomatic lanes, which is again, in my eyes, is very, very crucial. But yeah, I think it's possible.
Thank you, Rami. Over to you, Nili.
I think the best and maybe the only way to defeat, Hamas is not only a social or military or terror organization. Hamas is mainly an idea, and the only way to defeat an idea is to bring a better one to the table. So perhaps this is where we should put our energies in. I think, and maybe it's my hope, that we are about to see a generational change, both in Israel and the Palestinian Authority. Abu Mazen is 87, I believe. He's also, his future is behind him. So I believe once we're going to see Netanyahu stepping down willingly or not willingly, and Abu Mazen stepping down naturally or not naturally, we're going to see the rise of new leaders with new ideas and with new values that they're gonna stand on them, and new issues that they are willing to maybe expand them in order to achieve peace, in order to achieve, I'm not talking about peaceful and cheerful Middle East. I'm just talking about a place you can live in, a place you can wake up at Saturday morning and not being slaughtered in front of your children at your own home. You asked, one of you asked before about Lapid and the chance that he will join this coalition. Well, the chances are zero. As the one that used to be his advisor, I can tell you that even in the toughest choices, the only question that is in front of him is what is the right thing to do. And it's decided with values and not with interests or offices, etc. He did that when he chose to go to the Ministry of Finance in 2013. Even he can choose to be a foreign affairs minister. It would be much easier. He chose not to join Netanyahu while we handled the COVID-19 crisis. And he chose not to join Netanyahu once the right extremists are still in the government, not enabling everyone to perform what's needed. And again, the war budget now is the best example for that.
Thank you, Neely. Final words by you, Tal. Not yet.
Okay. So first of all, about the Israeli extreme right statements and language. This is just how extremists they are. They don't care about the fact that their statements are irresponsible. This is an irresponsible government. This is the meaning of zealots. You know, we have known in the past few years right-wing politicians who have been ideologists, but they were responsible. If we mention Naftali Bennett, in many ways, who kind of changed his positions, but at the end of the day, you know, his position. These are real zealots. These are people who did not join the government and grew into their very important portfolios that they have. Bezalel Smotrich did not wake up one day as finance minister and grow up to be all of Israel's finance minister. He stayed the same secular extremist who is taking care only of his sector. And this is true about Itamar Ben-Gvir. Some people thought, you know, getting this so much important job of being, the national security minister, people thought he would grow up. He did not grow up. He's a provocator. And the members of his party are true extremists that just do not represent, like, a proud about 80 or to 90% of Israelis in their positions and views, and they don't care about it. So that's just the meaning of how extreme they are, just to show. And about the claim that Netanyahu and Israeli intelligence knew about October 7th, well, I think that's part of a debate that is already handled during the war, and it'll, of course, come up again after the war. The Israeli intelligence did indeed have signs of an upcoming Hamas attack and of about Hamas plans to an attack. But unfortunately, as we have learned in recent weeks already, these signs did not grow up, and they did not. The senior echelon of the Israeli intelligence did not listen to these signs and dismissed these signs. And dismissed many warnings small warnings that appeared, they dismissed them. About Netanyahu, to be honest, he did not, because the Israeli intelligence dismissed most of the signs about Hamas planning an attack, then he did not know that Hamas was planning October 7th. He and the whole of the Israeli security apparatus were saying in the days ahead of October 7th that Hamas is deterred and does not want to open a new war or a new front with Israel. But Netanyahu did know that the past year of internal and domestic divisions has been an opportunity for our enemies. Over the past year, there have been several intelligence assessments which have been presented, warning from the judicial overhaul, saying that our enemies are watching. It is true that the intelligence and the defense establishment was pointing to the north, to Hezbollah, and not to the south, but there's no question that Netanyahu knew that there was a security threat to that accompanies the Israeli judicial overhaul, the aggressive judicial overhaul, and he dismissed it. He ignored it, he refused to hear the IDF chief of staff who wanted to warn him from pushing forward the legislation. So at the end of the day, the question of who knew and what will be part of the responsibility battle that Netanyahu is trying to avoid right now during the war. And Netanyahu is trying to actually wage already a campaign against the army establishment and the security establishment and the intelligence establishment for not, and trying to present himself as someone who did not know. But Netanyahu cannot ignore or erase his own responsibility for the whole conception of how the whole policy towards Hamas in the past 14 years, 12 and a half out of them, he was prime minister. He is the sponsor of the Hamas policy, he is the sponsor of the Qatari funding for Hamas, and he is the sponsor of the one who wanted to strengthen Hamas in order to weaken the Palestinian Authority over the years.
Thank you. We are wrapping now the discussion, and thank you, Rami, Tal, and Nili, for all that you've shared with us. I think we got a great understanding of what's happening in Israeli politics now with a future outlook. And you also managed to inject some realistic optimism into a debate that is quite dark and pessimistic these days, and that's in the spirit of Hanukkah. And I think it's a very appropriate way to handle this discussion. So thank you for that. And those of you who are willing to follow up on the notions that were voiced here about opportunities coming out of crisis or resumption of peace negotiations, you can go to MEI's website. There are some recent publications exactly on those topics that you may find of interest. So thank you for all that viewed that webinar and for the participants, and I wish to see